Morning, my dear students. Again, this is Dr. Devanshu Shekhar Pramanik, and I am welcoming you all to this class. Dear students, we are discussing about a topic which is actually very much interesting one, and which was communicating the respiratory system and digestive system, and that is the circulatory system. And in my last class and last session, I was discussing about different chambers of heart, and in that regard I have already discussed about the single chambered heart. This is the single chambered heart I have discussed, and especially this single chambered heart is present in case of lower vertebrate, that is the feces, and this is the amphioxus, and then the single chamber heart become modified into double chamber, that is two chambered heart, double chambered, and this double chambered heart is generally present in case of cyclostome and in case of what, elasmobranch also. And in my last class I was elaborately discussed about the heart of elasmobranch, that is the cartilaginous fish. Now in this class and today we shall discuss more about this in regard to that of the what, teleost, how this heart is present in case of bony fishes. So what I have told you now, that the double chamber means, for example, this is one chamber and this is another chamber, and this chamber is present the posterior one, and this chamber is one anterior one, and this chamber is generally known as auricle, and this chamber is known as ventricle. Okay. Usually the auricle collect blood, we know this is the plan, so this collect blood, and this ventricle actually deliver blood to different organs. So this is input and this is output. So now we shall see what type of heart is present in case of teleost. So in case of teleost or in case of bony fishes, the heart resembles to that of the elasmobranch also, but in teleost the conus is reduced and has a single pair of valve, that is conus, you know. So you see, so this is the ventricle, and the ventricle opens to another bulbous structure and ball like structure, and this structure is actually known as conus. So this is the conus. So this is conus, and this is also known as conus arteriosus. But in case of fishes, this conus is reduced. This conus is reduced and has a single pair of valve. So here a pair of valve is there, and this is reduced one. Then the proximal part of the ventral aorta. So if this is the ventral aorta, for example, this is the conus, and now this is the ventral aorta. This is the ventral aorta. So the proximal part means this part, that means the part which is now connected to the conus part. The proximal part of venous aorta, you know, artery, and the larger one is known as aorta. So the proximal part of the ventral aorta close to the conus become greatly enlarged and thick walled, called as bulbous arteriosus, that is known as bulbous arteriosus, you see. So this is the conus, and this part you see, this is the ventral aorta. So this is ventral aorta. Okay. So ventral aorta, again you know, this is ventral aorta because this part is present at the ventral region, and this is a large artery, fast artery produced from or developed from the ventricle, so that this is known as ventral aorta. Okay. So what I am telling, the ventral aorta, where it is connected, or the proximal part of the ventral aorta which is connected to the conus is very much enlarged. That means this part, that means this venous part, I can now show you the diagram. So this is the enlarged part. For example, this is again enlarged. So you see, this is enlarged part. So this is present in case of fishes. So this enlarged part is known as bulbous arteriosus, this part. So this part is known as bulbous. So this is bulbous arteriosus. So this is the special feature found in case of fishes, bulbous arteriosus. So in it, elastic dilates, that means in its elastic and dilates, so that means it is elastic in nature, that means it is contractile in nature, it is elastic in nature, and dilates at the time of ventricular contraction. That means during you see whenever the blood is, I am just giving the direction, whenever the blood is filled in the auricle, whenever the blood is filled in auricle, that means when the blood is poured into auricle, then the auricle is get filled up, and when the auricle is filled up, then auricle gets contracted, that means auricle will contract. So, due to contraction of the auricle, what will happen? This blood will pass into ventricle, because this is one way path, I have told you during my first session discussion. So, once the blood enters into the ventricle, then the ventricle will contract. So, when the ventricle will contract, that blood will come to the conus, okay. And as in case of fishes, I have told you that the connection between the ventricle and the conus is being regulated by a pair of valve, so that during contraction of the conus, there is not any possibility of returning of the blood into the ventricle, so that the blood will show one way traffic or one way direction, and that blood will come to the what? This is known as bulbus arteriosus, okay. Now, from the bulbus, that means when the ventricle will contract, immediately the bulbus will dilate, okay. Its muscle is contractile in nature. So, when this will contract, this will dilate, that means it will expand. So, due to expansion, this will collect easily the blood. So, once the ventral aorta collect the blood, then ventral aorta distribute this blood through its tributaries or through its branches, okay. So, in case of fishes, so this is all about the direction of blood in case of the fishes. So, in case of fish again, the heart is thus two chambered with a single circulation of blood, okay. That means single circulation means the blood will pass through the auricle, then to the ventricle, then to the conus, then to the ventral aorta. That means just one thing you see. So, in case of this blood is not completely pure, and that is, or either it is not completely pure, it is impure. So, that is it is mixed one. So, this is known as single circulation or single direction. Just I want to show you the diagram, you see. So, this is the venous side, okay, venous side, that means blood will be collected by this side, and this is in case of fish is known as sinus venosus, okay. So, sinus venosus will collect the blood, then this blood will pass to the atrium or auricle, auricle will collect the blood. So, from you see I have given the direction, from auricle the blood will enter into the ventricle is having the thick muscular wall, okay. So, now you see from the ventricle, you see, so here in this case the conus is reduced, and this conus contains a pair of what? This is the valve. So, this is a valve. So, now this valve will control the blood flow from the ventricle to the bulbus arteriosus. This is the bulbus arteriosus, because I have told you that this is the ventral aorta, and this ventral aorta at its proximal end become enlarged, and it forms one what? Bulbus arteriosus. This is the clear cut diagram of heart of fishes, okay. So, again I am just giving one comparison between the heart of the what? Teleost and the heart of the teleost and the scoliodon, that means bony fish and cartilaginous fish. You see, in case of chondrichthyes or cartilaginous fish, what? This ventricle is not so muscular, you see, but in this case this is muscular. So, this wall is been produced into some what? Ridges, produced into some pockets, so that it will contain more and more blood. So, you see, this is the sinus venosus, this is also sinus venosus. So, from the sinus venosus the blood will collected to the atrium, you see this is the atrium, from atrium to the ventricle, you see this is from atrium to ventricle, and then to conus arteriosus, which is clearly developed, clearly demarcated in case of scoliodon, but in case of this one it is converted to one bulbus. You see that in case of scoliodon or in case of cartilaginous species, the bulbus is not present. So, just I showed you the comparison between two hearts of what? That is scoliodon and teleost, or for example bony fishes, okay. So, now come to the 3-chamber heart. So, this is all about the 2-chamber heart. So, again my dear student, you should remember that. So, the typical plan is heart is consisted of the main chamber, that is auricle and ventricle. So, whatever division we have to make So, the division will be happened only to the auricle and ventricle, that means auricle will be divided in course of time into further chambers and the ventricle will divide into further chambers. That means no additional chambers will be added to this one, because these two chambers are the final chambers. Okay. So, now you see the 3 chamber heart. So, if we again consider the case of 3 chamber heart, you see we know in course of evolution the fishes develop into amphibia. Okay. So, amphibia are the first vertebrate which actually develop what, lungs, and they respire by lungs, but during breeding season as they are moving to again the aquatic basin, so that they are called as amphibian. But in between these two there is another group that is known as dipnoi, and we know that dipnoi is regarded as the what, long fishes. Okay. That means they used to respire by lungs. So, first of all we say what type of, or first of all we shall see what type of heart is present in case of dipnoi, and it is observed that in case of dipnoi the first 3 chambered heart develop. So, in dipnoans a septum divides the atrium, just you see. So, this is the, for example, typical plan, and if you just divide this one into 2, so this is for example auricle, and if I divide this auricle into 2 chamber, this is the right auricle and this is the left auricle, that means it becomes a 3 chamber heart. Okay. So, that actually happens. So, in dipnoans a septum, a division, a partition divides the atrium into a right and left chamber. This is correlated with the use of the swim bladder as an organ of respiration, because we know in case of what, some fishes the swim bladder is also there. So, this is correlated with the use of swim bladder as an organ of respiration and represents the first step towards the development of a double type of circulation or circulatory system, whereby both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood enter the heart and keep separate. So, what I want to say, you see just. So, for example, you see this is the structure of the heart. Okay. So, now you see this is the heart, and what happens, this is the atrium or auricle, and now this auricle is divided into right atrium and this is the left atrium. Okay. And this single ventricle is there. So, what happens now, the venous blood through sinus venosus come into the right atrium. So, this is the right atrium where sinus venosus is communicating. Okay. That means the right atrium collect the impure blood. So, this is impure. Okay. Understand? And now this blood will be given to the ventricle, and from ventricle this blood will be delivered into 2 major part. One is the pulmonary or lungs part where it will be purified, and another is the body part where it will be distributed. So, again when it will be purified in lungs, then the after purification this blood will be collected to the again what, left atrium. So, that left atrium will keep always or contain always the pure blood. That means in 3 chamber heart the auricle actually keep the impure blood and pure blood separated, but when these bloods are pumped into the ventricle, again they get mixed. Okay. So, what I want to say that in case of 3 chamber heart, what happens due to division of the auricle by a septum into right atrium and into left atrium, the deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood remain separated. Okay. So, this is the provision. So, blood from the right ventricle. Now, what happens? Blood from the right ventricle of the lung fishes or dipnoi passes into the right ventricle. So, this is ventricle, and this ventricle is not divided into 2, but it is assumed that this blood comes to the right side of the ventricle and then pumped into the primitive lung like gas bladder in case of dipnoi by pulmonary arteries, which branch up from the 6th pair of aortic arches. So, I shall discuss later on what is aortic arches. Just you remember that once the blood comes by right ventricle and that enters into the once from blood comes from the right auricle, then it enters into the right ventricle. From right ventricle it enters into the pulmonary artery, and this pulmonary artery branches off or takes this blood to what? The gill or sixth gill where it is purified. So, this is the provision in case of dyspnea. Just I want to show you the picture you see. So, this is the heart of the dyspnea. So, now you see for example this one. So, this is the interventricular septum, although the auricle is divided into right and left, but the ventricle is not divided, but here the ventricular wall is designed in such a way that the right auricle when pumps, the blood will be collected or blood will be remain in the right side of the ventricle, and when the blood of the left auricle will be remain in the left side of the ventricle. So, that this is the provision. Okay. So, this is the ventricle you see, this is the ventricular wall, and this is the interventricular septum, and this is the for example right side, and this is the left side. So, from the left side the blood will go to different parts of the body, from the right side that blood will go to the or it will pass to the what lungs or gas bladder for purification. Okay. So, this is all about the 3 chamber heart in case of dyspnea. Now, come to the amphibia. So, practically or provisionally amphibia is the first vertebrate where a well defined 3 chamber heart is observed. In case of amphibia, this heart is divisible into 3 chamber, means 2 atria or 2 auricles are there and 1 ventricle is there. So, in amphibians the dorsal atrium, okay, that means the atrium shifts anterior to the ventricle. Okay. Secondly, the sinus venosus opens to the right atrium. I have shown you in the picture. So, sinus venosus open to the right atrium dorsally, not to the posteriorly dorsally. Okay. So, the atrium is completely divided into right and left atrium by one what partition. This is known as interatrial what septum. Okay. And usually what happens during division of the atria into 2 chambers, one opening prevails, and that opening is known as foramen ovale. So, mostly this is found in case of also dyspnea, but this is not found in case of what? The amphibians. So, amphibia has clear cut divided 2 chambered what atria, that is the right atrium and the left atrium. Okay. So, now what happens? Deep pockets develop in the ventricular cavity. So, now if this is the just I am now drawing one rough picture just for your that is the clearance, you see, for actually explaining this one. You see for example this is the auricle and this is the ventricle. Okay. So, this is the septum. So, now this ventricular wall is deeply pocketed, that means the wall of the ventricle is muscular and it is deep or it develop deep pockets. Okay. So, deep pockets develop in the ventricular cavity and the conus arteriosus. So, now you know, so from this the conus arteriosus will develop, that is the ventricular part. So, from ventricle conus arteriosus will develop. The conus arteriosus divides into 2 systemic and pulmonary vessels by a spiral valve. So, now you see, so this is divided into 2 systemic, you see. So, what is happening here? So, now this is the for example right auricle and this is the left auricle. Okay. Now, to the right auricle there opens what? This is the sinus venosus, and we know sinus venosus is a vein which actually collect impure blood from different parts of the body. This is impure blood from different parts of the body, and this will be given to the right atrium. Okay. So, now what happens? From right atrium, for example I am giving one side configuration, from right atrium this blood will enter into the ventricle during contraction. So, now when the blood actually for example this is the left atrium and this left atrium contains pure blood. So, this is pure blood. So, when both of the atria will contract, at that time the impure blood from right atrium this will enter into the ventricle. Similarly, the pure blood from left atrium will also enter into the ventricle, but the pockets of the ventricle are arranged in such a way that and one spiral is developed in that ventricle, so that impure blood impure blood will pass to this side and it will enter into one artery which is known as pulmonary artery, and at the same time the pure blood will enter due to presence of the spiral into the what? The left side artery, that is known as systemic artery. So, systemic artery will distribute pure blood to different parts of the body, and the impure blood will be passed through this pulmonary artery to the lungs for purification, and after purification it will again return to the what? The left atrium. Okay. Again I am telling. So, for example, this is the systemic artery and this is the pulmonary artery. Okay. So, what happens? This pulmonary artery, so this is the right atrium and this is the right ventricle, okay, and this is the left atrium and this is the left ventricle. So, during contraction I am starting one circuit. During contraction the impure blood from right atrium will enter into the right ventricle, and from that it will enter into one part of the systemic artery, that means the ventral aorta, due to separation by one spiral valve. Okay. So, that is the separation, and due to this one the impure blood will enter into the lungs, that is the part where the oxygen is present, and after purification this blood will again return to the what? This is the what? Left auricle. Okay. Simultaneously the impure blood is purified by this one, and simultaneously the contraction of the left auricle will cause the delivering of blood into the left ventricle. So, from that one it will enter into the systemic artery, and systemic artery will distribute the blood to different organs. So, what I want to say that in case of what? Amphibians, although the auricle and ventricles are not clear cut divided, still some device is there, that device actually make clear cut separation of the pure blood and the impure blood, so that the in case of frog, although major part is mixed blood, still there is the provision for separation of pure blood and impure blood due to presence of one spiral valve. So, just I want to show you in picture, you see. So, for example, you see this is the heart of one amphibian or amphibian heart, and this is for example left auricle, this is right auricle, and you see this is the ventricle and these are the pockets. Okay. So, just I do not want to clearly show you this one, just I want to give the method of circulation, you see. So, this is the ventricle. Okay. So, now this is the, you see this is the spiral valve, and due to the presence of this one, so what happens? The pure blood is now passing to one side and impure blood is passing to one side. Okay. So, this is the, you see this is the spiral valve, it is written spiral valve. So, due to presence of spiral valve, what happens? Blood, pure blood will enter to this side, impure blood will enter to this side, and this side blood will enter through this arch and it will enter into the lungs for purification, and this arch will take the blood for purification. So, this is the, just in this diagram I just want to show you how the spiral valve act as separating the pure blood and impure blood in case of the heart of the frog, but this is not 100%, some extent it is what? The remaining of separation of pure blood and impure blood in case of fishes. So, now this is all about the heart of the what? Amphibians or 3-chamber heart. Now again this 3-chamber heart is also present in case of reptile. You know, just after the amphibian, reptile comes. Reptile is the more advanced type of tetrapod than that of the amphibian, but in case of reptile there is also present the 3-chamber heart, but it is to some extent developed. So, in reptiles the heart is further advanced. Okay. The atrium is always completely separated into right and left chamber, and in many forms the sinus venosus is incorporated into the wall of the right atrium. That means, you see, in case of frog the sinus venosus is clearly marked, and this sinus venosus is a triangular structure which is collecting the venous blood, and after filled up the sinus venosus, this blood is pour into the right atrium. This is the provision in case of amphibians. But what happens in case of reptile? The sinus venosus is not clearly marked, rather the sinus venosus has been merged into the right atrium. That means the venous blood is directly poured into the right atrium. So, the atrium is always separated and the sinus venosus is incorporated into the wall of the right atrium. Again, the ventricle is partly divided. Okay, the ventricle is partly divided by a septum in most of the reptile. That means very interesting thing you see. Just I am giving one imaginary diagram. Okay. So, for example, again this is the in case of what? In case of amphibians, the 3 chamber heart is always present. That means the auricle is already divided into 2 chambers and this is a common path to the ventricle. But in case of the reptile, now the division of the ventricle has been started. That means a part of the ventricle is divided. So, this is on progress, but this is not divided completely. So, this is the, for example, this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium, this is the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle. Still the ventricle is common in this way. That means the septum is developed in case of reptile to divide the ventricle into 2 chambers, but this septum is not completely developed in case of the most of the reptiles. But in case of crocodile, yes, in case of crocodile and in case of alligators, this is completely divided. So that in case of crocodile, you can see 4 chamber heart, the right auricle, left auricle, right ventricle, left ventricle. That means right auricle is communicating to the right ventricle through one right auriculoventricular aperture and left auricle is communicating to the left ventricle by left auriculoventricular aperture, just like the developed heart. So, this is found only in case of the alligators, only in case of the what? The crocodiles, but most of the reptile possess 3 chamber heart where the ventricle is going to be just separated, but this is not separated completely. So, this is all about them. Then that means due to separation or partly separation, this means that oxygenated blood coming from the lungs to the left side of the heart is essentially separated from the non-oxygenated blood from the body of the right side. But in case of crocodile, the 2 types of blood is completely separated and nearly complete in other, nearly incomplete in other reptiles, but some mixing does occur in other parts of the circulatory system. So, this is all about the 3 chamber heart. Let us now close this session. Next we shall start the 4 chamber heart in next session. Up to that I am again remaining and thank you.